If it feels like Christopher Nolan is selling out or manifesting in his most recent film, it's probably because he is, okay? Because honestly, I think he's projecting himself into his films now, which is a problem, and it's totally it's a contradiction to his what he kind of wrote in his film Inception. The part, remember when he says, like, do not use reality to create the dreams because you'll lose yourself, you'll lose your sense of reality. But you can kind of see this in his films. I mean, like, with Oppenheimer, him writing in first person, or Interstellar. I mean, he had mentioned that he'd been wanting to spend more time with his kids. You see it in Interstellar, him kind of, he has a daughter character. His oldest child is a daughter, by the way, Christopher Nolan. But in Interstellar, there's the daughter, and it was this idea that he had to go out, save the world, but he'll come back to his daughter. You can kind of see he's a little bit like, okay, he's kind of putting himself in there. And then the Odyssey now is like, after a long journey, he thinks he can return, having defied the gods. I'm starting to get a sense, is that what you're saying, that you've been out in the world so long and you're going to return to your family even though they're grown now? I feel like he's putting himself in the films, which is breaking the rules that he made in Inception. But like all filmmakers and films and filmmakers in Hollywood now, Satan comes to collect, and that's the thing. We can see now their skills have dried up. Satan, because Satan cannot truly create. He gives, sure, fame, fortune, money, prestige. These are all things that the devil can give, that Satan can give, but he can't create. That's of God. I think God gives people, God-given talent, and then once you give it over to Satan, he'll take it and use it to corrupt and to blaspheme God's name. But eventually, it runs dry. Your skills will run dry, because Satan, of course, is not like Jesus. Jesus, can make all things new. Jesus can take your skills and turn it into something you never knew it could be. Satan does not give you more. Satan sucks you dry. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. Film is a culmination of all the arts. It is also the most deceptive art form. Moving pictures are an illusion in and of itself. Yes, film has told great stories, but its origins are deceit. This podcast will look at films and weigh them for their merit, so that you will be armed to resist deception. Hi, welcome to Nightstone Film Revelations. I'm Professor Stone, and today we need to discuss Christopher Nolan. I'm sure many of you have seen the new Odyssey trailer, and yes, I want to discuss Christopher Nolan and using the Odyssey trailer as a kind of a jumping off point. As his new film that's coming out, again, for those who don't know, which I imagine would be very few people who like film who don't know about Christopher Nolan, but he made a lot of great films. I want to start off too, prefacing that, again, I was a fan of Christopher Nolan films. Unfortunately, I would have to say I'm not as much now. Yeah, I was a fan of his films. He made a lot of great films. As everyone knows, the Dark Knight trilogy probably what got a lot of people onto him, including myself. I was a Batman fan, particularly when I was a child. And so his Batman treatment, again, was pretty spectacular, and had that realism that I think made it all the more appealing. He made films. He started with Following, that did well in film festivals. Then of course he did Memento. He did Insomnia. He did the Batman trilogy. He started getting Batman Begins. Then he got Prestige, Dark Knight, Inception, Dark Knight Rises, Interstellar, Dunkirk, Tenet, Oppenheimer, and then now it's on to Odyssey. So yeah, he's become a sort of, you might say, household name director in Hollywood, you might say. But there's been obviously a sort of backlash, I think a lot of people have noticing online about this new film, about certain aspects of the Odyssey. And if I'm honest, I hope other people are honest too, when I first heard he was going to do the Odyssey, I have to say my first reaction was kind of meh. And also that's kind of the same reaction I had for when I heard Oppenheimer's coming out. So, and I'm going to explain that a little bit later. But you would think, again, I'm a fan of period films. So again, this is not just like homework, like a lot of people say period films are homework, which I hate it when people say that, because again, many period films have been very entertaining, and it's always fun to go back in time in that way in films. But it's really, I think, because a couple of reasons. I felt like I've heard this story of the Odyssey plenty of times, even though there hasn't been like a lot of major films with the full-on period treatment, but like O Brother Where Art Thou, there's been versions like O Brother Where Art Thou where there's a kind of alluding to the original story. And I've saw the one that was on NBC. If anyone my age remembers it, it was a TV movie basically of the Odyssey, and I thought they did a good job of it. So the special effects was obviously a little bit less than it is now, but I still thought they did a good job with that. So when Christopher Nolan saying he's going to do the Odyssey, I just wasn't very enthused, and I was thinking, even before I saw the visuals, I was thinking the stark treatment that he tends to go for kind of in my mind made it less appealing in my mind. And so I just felt like we're treading on old ground here, and his style is not going to necessarily improve it, so that I wasn't very excited about it when I heard it. And then the other thing I noticed when it was more and more information was coming out, because they kind of tease it to you on IMDb, I saw it was the casting, and I know everyone's thinking, oh yeah, the casting. Actually, the casting that everyone's talking about now is not the first thing that alerted me to a problem. It was Matt Damon being the Odysseus. And it's just, I don't know, Matt Damon, and it's not because he's like, again, I do feel like they could have gone for maybe a little bit more Mediterranean look, but that's not the reason for Matt Damon. I just feel like in filmmaking, there are types. People have certain types, and he's the type of guy, like, he was perfectly cast, I feel like, as Dr. Mann in Interstellar. He's this very much, he kind of has this preppy boy look about him, he's perfectly cast in Saving Private Ryan. I think he's, usefully cast in Jason Bourne. All these roles, I think were good for him. But Odysseus, no, I'm not. He's too, again, preppy boy-ish about him. It just doesn't work for me. So that actually was the first casting of it that I felt like, no. I also think he's kind of at that age now, like Brad Pitt, where they kind of want to prove how fit they can get before they finally hang up the workout cape, I guess you could say. That was a problem. And then, of course, then the trailer comes out, and then we've got the lines.
My dad is coming home. They're pining for daddy.
Okay, that definitely was like, okay, what's going on here? And again, I had already been having some suspicions about problems with Christopher Nolan as a director and writer from Oppenheimer, and I'm going to explain that soon. But this, I'm sorry, is like just bad writing. And of course, people have learned now that I think it's because it's based off of this newer version of a adaptation of the Odyssey, where I think the writer actually wrote Daddy and things like that in there. That's just, I'm sorry. Look, yeah, we're not expecting people to speak ancient Greece. I mean, that would be ancient Greek. I mean, that would be interesting, though. Kind of like Passion of Christ, but. You come to expect like at least a formal way of speaking, like in Gladiator. There's almost a slight Shakespearean aspect to it, and so when you have people saying very modern terms like daddy, I mean, that dad, I'm pretty sure, didn't come into our language until much way, like, probably, I think, 20th century. So it's very modern, and it sounds awful. It just sounds bad. It just daddy. Your daddy coming back for you. My dad's coming home. And then even he's like, let's go, as a charge. Let's go. I mean, come on. Think of all the films where the charging in films. I mean, you at least say charge. I mean, like in Glory, charge. Or, Lord of the Rings, death to victory. All that stuff. It's, let's go. What's another one? Forward, man! And Gladiator, Roma Victor! Something that they would have said, in The King, with Timothy Chalamet plays Henry V. He says, on me! There's the ways you can have someone say charge or lead his men into battle. They're not saying, let's go. Let's go. Like, let's go to the mall? This is bad. Okay, so yeah, and in this, so the trailer just confirmed to me, and I'm sure to other people, but something that I had a suspicion, I was afraid of. And then, of course, people were complaining about the casting, the obvious casting issues. Now, I feel like people are being unfair with the Lupita Nyong'o part, because, yeah, okay, ancient descriptions described her with fair skin and all that stuff, but I really do think the point of her is that she was beautiful. And Lupita Nyong'o is a beautiful woman. I always thought so. I thought it was a shame that they cast her as this yellow alien in Star Wars. It was just a complete waste of her beauty. And everyone keeps showing pictures, I think, of how she looked in 12 Years a Slave. Well, the makeup and it made her look ugly in that one, because she's supposed to be in torment. But she's a beautiful woman. I always thought so. And by the way, Italians really think a lot of dark-skinned women are beautiful. So I'm sure Italians probably think she's a Helen of Troy type. So I also honestly think people are being a little unfair with that one. Now, I do, on a side note, I do have to say there's been a slight weird look in Lupita Nyong'o's eyes nowadays. Like, I don't know, she's, Hollywood's corrupt, so who knows what's going on with that. But aside from that, I don't really think that's a miscasting. I think that's fine. Of course, everyone is noticing, Miss Page being cast as possibly Achilles. I don't think there's enough confirmation that she is playing Achilles, but generally, as far as I have to say on that, I just think we need to pray for Ellen Page again. People want to call her by her new name. She was born and given the name Ellen Page. She is a woman. When if this earth lasts another 100 years and people excavate her bones, they're going to say, "Here lies a woman." Okay, it's really sad what has happened to people like her. Obviously, she did not have a father that gave her worth and told her that she was fearfully and wonderfully made. She doesn't know that God fearfully and wonderfully made her. She's obviously, like a lot of people are probably atheist, and she thinks that she's just a blob of genes that became something that she didn't want to be. And it's a real shame, because it's a shame. I thought she was a beautiful young woman too. She's close to my age. I remember when I was first seeing her, I thought she was attractive, and it's a real shame that she's, and again, attractive aside too, it's really about just being, not creating an abomination out of yourself. And I think we need to pray for her. I'll pray for her now. Again, Jesus, I pray that you bless Ellen Page and fill her mind with your wisdom, and let her know how much she is loved by you, and how much you knew her before she was born, and you made her a woman, and he loves you. I pray that you bless her with that, Jesus, and I pray other people pray for her too. The casting. Okay, this is all just revealing. Okay, something's wrong here, and honestly, I actually think there's something more going on here. Christopher Nolan, I do think is losing his touch, and he's starting to manifest. I also think that this is his cats, and if I'll explain, if anyone remembers Tom Hooper, who was also working under Universal. His last film was Cats. Last I checked, this is the last film he's made, and I just find it interesting that IMDb literally tells this man is known for Cats, this horrible film. I'm sure if anyone recalls, I could show a couple pictures of it. It's so bad. And Tom Hooper, this is Tom Hooper, the director. He made King's Speech, which won an Oscar. If you care about that stuff, he did Les Miserables, which there's some flaws in there, but it's generally a good, well-made film. But no, he'll now forever be known for making Cats. And so I digress on that for a moment, because that was under Universal as well. And I honestly think, again, it's my hypothesis, but I have noticed in Hollywood that they're trying to, just like they're trying to kill the writer, they're also trying to kill the director. And to give a director something like Cats, and then that is literally the last film he ever made so far, I think it's because they tried to kill the director. And then you see this throughout the last recent decades. Major directors will get a film, and it maybe goes over budget, and then they end up not working again. Or they'll give a movie that's bad and that they've been made a fool of, and then their star meter lowers. And I think this is what this is. Again, Christopher Nolan decided to join Universal instead of WB. It had to do with the fact that he didn't like the deal that WB had. WB was going to have your film come out along with other WB films, so it was kind of muddled in with other films. WB wanted the films to go straight to streaming after a couple of weeks, and Christopher Nolan didn't like that because he's still under the delusion to think that people are going to the movie theaters, which honestly I think is a delusion. Again, obviously theaters are still people are going, but it's not like it used to be. And I think Christopher Nolan's, is under the delusion that people are still going. He's also, I honestly feel like, a little under the delusion, or rather ignorance, that it's nice to go to the films now. I mean, at least the last time I went, people are talking, people are on their phones, the projectionists don't know how to calibrate the volume. The last time I went to a Christopher Nolan film in the theater was Dark Knight Rises, and gosh, they blasted the noise so much that it literally burst my eardrums, or it really hurt. And with Christopher Nolan sound and Hans Zimmer music, and even in that same setting, there was a guy who somehow was able to snore throughout it, and I heard that. I've been in movie theaters where people are fornicating, and so it's like, and to go all the way out there and pay $15 for a movie ticket, and I can stay at home and pay $15 for all 4 of my family members to see it. I'm sorry, this is not much of a decision anymore, and I think Christopher Nolan needs to get with the program, but he didn't. So he decided to leave WB because he didn't want to go to streaming, and he got a deal with Universal. And my point, though, leading to that, is that I do think Universal is actively trying to kill the director. Sure, they'll give him what he wants at first. They gave him Oppenheimer and all that stuff, and now they gave him the Odyssey. And I think they gave it to him to direct, by the way, because again, if people aren't, it is free domain, but I find it interesting that the NBC version that I mentioned earlier, well, NBC's under Universal. So is that a coincidence? I don't know. And everyone needs to keep in mind, too, as far as production, producers do have a lot of control in the final edits. They have a lot of control in who gets cast, even. So keep that in mind. And I'm not putting Christopher Nolan off the hook. I do think he has kind of sold out, but I also think he might have made a deal with people that he probably shouldn't have, and doesn't realize they're going to probably kill his career. So that's when I say I think the Odyssey is his cats. That's what I mean by that. But I want to go back a little bit. The thing is, I've noticing some problems with Christopher Nolan actually before the Odyssey, and I feel like with Oppenheimer. And I hope I'm not alone in this. I know a lot of people have said his Oppenheimer is really good, but I do feel like there's a slight bandwagon issue here, and I'm not trying to condescend to people at all, but I say this only because as I mentioned before, I was a major fan of Christopher Nolan, but I noticed even while I was a fan of Christopher Nolan films, because I could see that he was a very innovative director. Particularly because he was able to take action films and make them smart. A lot of people noticed this too. A lot of other people noticed this, and so I always felt like he kind of had you could say, if you care about that, Oscar-winning ability, whatever. He was an innovative director, or at least that's how he was portrayed, and the films that he made portrayed that. But at the same time, I would always come across people who always thought he was just some mainstream blockbuster director, which I felt like, well, his films break the block, certainly, but they're smart. So what I noticed, though, with Oppenheimer is that I feel like after this one, because it was more arty, you might say, it had nudity and all that, now people took him seriously. And so that's where I'm saying, I'm not condescending to people, but I actually had a lot of problems with what Oppenheimer was going to be. And I'll admit, I actually haven't seen Oppenheimer, but let me tell you some of my first reactions that I feel like was a harbinger of the problems that were starting to come with Christopher Nolan. So again, like with Odyssey, when I first heard he was going to do Oppenheimer, I was kind of, is that going to be entertaining? It's because he came out. Of course, we're used to his Batman trilogy. We're used to Interstellar, Inception, Dunkirk. Again, I have no problem with a historical pick. I have no problem with a biographical pick either. But and then he did Tenet, which I liked it a lot. That one a lot too. I did have to see it 5 times to finally understand what was happening at the end. But and I do think a part of that is a problem of sound, which I'm going to talk about that later too. But when we get to finally, he said Oppenheimer, the biopic. It was kind of another. I mean, if anyone knows anything about Oppenheimer, I mean, that's the thing. Before they saw the film, I was kind of thinking, well, what's so entertaining about Oppenheimer? And I'm sure he did a good job with it. Again, I haven't seen it. I'm sure it's entertaining enough. But that was my first reaction. And then again, as it comes out, they give you little tidbits, as they do with all of his films. It found out that it was rated R, particularly for actuality, I'll say, and that was a concern for me because you see, up until then, I'd say the only other film he had that had a little bit of actuality in it was a little bit of Memento in the dialogue, because there was indication of the R word happened to his wife, and then there was some nudity in Insomnia, but it was of a body in it, and so it was briefly shown, and it wasn't particularly actual, you might say. But then after that, he did, Batman trilogy, which is geared to boys and children and a lot. And then he did Prestige and Inception, and there wasn't any. People were used to him not having any of that in his films. So then when he came, now he's doing Oppenheimer, and I saw that it's going to be rated R for that. I was concerned. And then to find out later too, because then they revealed later, and there's articles about it, that it was full on X scenes, which that's like, oh man, that I just was trying to imagine. It's like, oh, that's going to be jarring because people are used, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't read the rated R symbol. So there's going to be I would imagine there were a lot of fans who went inside and were like, oh, whoa, and people even described it as awkward. I haven't seen it. I don't plan on it just because of that. And to me, it really feels like it was a sellout. And anyone knows, they even have a joke about, like, if you want an Oscar, take your kit off, you have to get nude, you have to have an X scene, have a biopic. I mean, and so again, I'm sorry, but it felt like he was selling out. And lo and behold, he got an Oscar, didn't he? Yeah, now that he made the film Oppenheimer, now it's got a X scene in it. Now he gets an Oscar. Whereas before he did Dark Knight, and they didn't nominate him for that, even though it was a very well-made film. So they apologized by nominating for him for Inception, but they didn't still give him the win because he would have to pay the toll to get the Oscar, right? And so he did. But yeah, there it is. So yeah, and then but there's another thing that really, frankly, just was a WTF for me when I found out about Oppenheimer, was the writing in first person. For those who don't know, he wrote Oppenheimer in first person. And for those who don't know, script writing, you do not write scripts in first person. You write scripts in third person present tense, as in, so Oppenheimer goes here, Oppenheimer does this, so-and-so drops a paper and Oppenheimer picks it up. It's supposed to be present tense because it's happening presently. So for him to write it first person, it breaks all the rules in filmmaking. But think about it too, the psychosis of this. So he a lot of times will write in a hotel, kind of like in Memento, where he was stuck in a hotel. He'll write his story. So he went in a hotel, and he started writing, "I did this, I did that." That's first person. So stepping into the mind of Oppenheimer. So, and I'm just curious, because since there are X scenes in the film, you wrote, "I did this and I did that." I'm sorry, this is seeming a little psychotic here. Okay, and by the way, I hate it when directors do this. I hate it when directors will break the rules of filmmaking, and not in a way that's innovative. They always argue that it's innovative. It's usually these rules. Again, rules are set up for a reason. It's for order, and for instance, people will revere people like David Fincher, who films 70 takes for one shot, for every single shot, frankly torturing actors by doing that. But people think, well, he's a genius, right? So I want to do it too. And I hate this because it makes students think, oh yeah, that's the way to do it. So all these rules be darned, because hey, the geniuses do it. Yeah, and so now, if I have to teach screenwriting, unfortunately, I might have to tell people, no, you can't write it in first person. That makes no sense, and frankly, I think that can do something psychologically to you. I really do think so. So yeah, and then adding the fact that he left WB for those really stupid reasons. I think I felt like, okay, this Christopher Nolan is selling out. He's also, I think, getting a little deranged. He's losing himself in the film. Kind of like, it reminds me of Inception, because for those who don't know, or he said the film Inception wasn't about filmmaking, but it really does apply, at least figuratively. And I even was inspired by Inception to how you kind of how films are supposed to be kind of like a dream, and how they can, unfortunately, they can plant inceptions. And the idea is that the dreamer is kind of like the director, and there even is a sense in the film that you can lose yourself in the dream and lose yourself in the creation of these dreams. And I don't know, I kind of feel like that's happening to Christopher Nolan. So Oppenheimer really was my first major clue that he's losing himself a little bit. Although there was a couple others early little hints going along the way, which I also want to talk about some of that stuff, because now that my eyes are open and I can see that generally everyone in Hollywood is somewhat messed up and they're likely going to manifest and reveal their problems. Anyway, so now I feel like my eyes are open. And there were things that I noticed along the way, even with some of Christopher Nolan stuff, that now I can see is just the beginnings of a little bit of hints of Nolan's manifesting, and also now that we know that Hollywood is not only corrupt, it's literally since its inception has been an occult practice and trying to lead people astray. Now we can see that many filmmakers are using films to a lot of times signal. To show their allegiances, and there's some things about the earlier films that I feel like are too coincidental to ignore, and I want to talk about a little bit of that as well. So yeah, there are earlier hints in Christopher Nolan's films, and now I'm ashamed to say that I was a fan of Nolan's films, as I've already said. The reason I say ashamed to say is because I promised not to become a fan like that again, ever since I fell for Harry Potter, and that's a whole other thing I can talk about in maybe a different podcast. But I fell for something like Harry Potter, and I learned the problems with it, and I didn't want to basically become this fan of things anymore. I wanted to be discerning, and I swore I wasn't, and I was trying to think, even as I enjoyed Christopher Nolan's films, as he made one excellent film after another, I was thinking, nope, don't become a fan. I wanted to keep it in the back of my mind that he might reveal himself one day as being deceptive. So I kept this in the back of my mind, like a totem, you might say, just in case the dream might collapse, so to speak. And along the way there were some things that I noticed, some things that stick out now. One of the things that I would say one of the earliest things that I stood up that I always forgave in his films was, his sound, particularly with the dialogue. Have anyone noticed this? He liked to have what he called realistic dialogue, and by realistic being as in people mumbling, people slurring their words, or not speaking very loudly or clearly, or even under a mask. And it really was starting to get worse and worse. I feel like I first noticed it in probably Inception with Saito. They really made him embrace, I guess, his Japanese accent, which, by the way, when the Ken Watanabe was in Last Samurai, he was playing a full-on Japanese samurai, and yet obviously the director still wanted people to understand what he was saying, but not so in Inception, I guess. I honestly think that that might have been a cause of some people not understanding what was happening in Inception. But you go further with Bane behind the mask. You got that one guy in Dunkirk who, what was he saying in that boat? I still don't know what he was saying. You hear even sometimes where the music was too loud, like in Interstellar, when the main character says, "Remember to brand 90% before he detaches," and then the masks in Tenet. I mean, you got like.
Ukrainians expecting the passenger. I've never seen a cancellation like this. Covering the tracks.
Freaking out the audience.
It's just the cheap seats. On our mission.
I mean, we're talking about a film about inverted time sequences, and you're gonna have someone explain something through a mask. So remember this and this and this and that. And if you don't understand that, you better not go any further. What? What did you say? It's ridiculous. And his argument was to make it more realistic. But it's like, I mean, I'm sorry, but like, I would rather it be like the rest of the films. I mean, I understand what people say in other films. I mean, Pulp Fiction, I understand what everyone is saying, and maybe it's slightly unrealistic because they're so that we can hear the dialogue. I don't care. I mean, Hitchcock films are not bad because people spoke clearly. Why does he do this? Is it so that we can go see the film again? It's like, I saw the film 5 times. I still didn't hear what they had to say, especially when they were speaking through a mask. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just not realistic. I mean, think of it. I mean, you know what's realistic? When someone speaks through a mask, you have to be like, huh? What did you say? Yeah, that's realistic. Realistically, everyone would be asking, hey, I'm sorry, Saito, could you say that again? When Bane talks to Batman in the end, and he says, "So I see you come back to die in your city." Batman should be like, "Sorry, what?" "I said, so you've come back to die in your city." "I'm sorry, I still don't understand what you're saying." "Oh, never mind." That was one thing I just felt like, oh, come on, get your head out of your, just record it how so that people can understand. Again, and that's when you're starting to, as a director, forget the audience, and that's a problem as a director when you forget the audience. That you should be making the film for the audience, not pandering to the audience, but making the film so that the audience understands. And I think that's where you see some problems with like Tenet. The fact that there are some issues definitely with explaining the time problem. And I think part of the issues, again, for people who don't know what the hell's happening at the end of Tenet, I can try and probably explain it as quick as I can. But like, the idea is that the people in the future, we're going to get the dead drop of the thing. Again, it's very complicated, but I find it interesting he never showed the people in the future, and because that's his style, right? He would probably argue, that's my style, I'm not going to show the people in the future because that would be kind of weird. It's like, okay, well, now you're putting your style above people's comprehension of the film. Again, not serving the audience when you should be, in that case, serving the audience. I talked about with Kaya that if, say, like Mel Gibson, who's very good at telling a story visually, if he did Tenet, we would, I think, see the people in the future so that we would understand what was happening, because you need to tell the story visually as well as audibly. And Christopher Nolan in Tenet didn't quite tell the story visually as well, and he didn't quite tell it audibly as well. I think this is why a lot of people didn't understand what was happening in Tenet. It took me 5 times before I realized what exactly was happening in the end. So yeah, and if the director starts forgetting the audience, that's a problem. That's a major problem as a director. And let's keep in mind too, I think there's some issues with him with a little bit. There's some minor issues with casting that I'm going to mention, and we have to keep in mind that he's not professionally trained as a director. He didn't go to school for it. I'm sure he's read a lot of books and all that stuff. But having been through a master's program, I can tell you that they teach you things like how to cast the right people, and I do think there's some issues with that. Particularly, I noticed. By the way, he got a degree like in English literature, so. You would think a professional director should have something more direct. If we're going to accept him widely as a well-renowned director, he should have had a degree in film. But yeah, it's in English literature. But I can see problem with casting, particularly in Interstellar, with Jessica Chastain. I honestly don't think. I think she was very badly cast in this, and I also think she was a better actress when she was younger, but she's starting to become too self-aware, and it was starting kind of around the same time as Interstellar. You can see this particularly in that scene where she's yelling at her brother. I do, and to be fair to her, I feel like Christopher Nolan was trying to heighten that scene and didn't know how to direct her correctly, and yeah, you can see that. Again, signs that he wasn't quite trained in being a director. And then the other problem I'd say as far as directing actors, is allowing Heath Ledger to method act the Joker is not only was foolish, it was disastrous. If you actually look into how Heath Ledger passed, it had to do with his reaction to having played the Joker. Because it's particularly this Joker of all ones, is that they were going for a very realistic style. So he was basically a serial, life ender, and he was a like the Una exploder. He was using bang bangs to blow people's heads off. This is a very dark version of the Joker. I mean, the Joker's character is already dark, and for him to method act that, I'm sorry, but when you method act, you are calling on evil spirits. It's just what happens. I'm sorry. People think, evil spirits, your head's going to turn around and, it's going to be like, Exorcist. It's like, no, it's a little more subtle than that. And when people say they like channel, roles, channel spirits to get roles, or method act, you're basically trying to manifest this character into reality. And think of that, the spirit of the Joker. No wonder he passed because of that. And I think that was just irresponsible as a director. If I was the director, I would say, no, you're not going to be method acting the Joker. No. You see, and for those that don't know, the correct way to to direct an actor, for actors to act, is to treat it like you're just playing. You're playing. You know, it's like kids playing. When kids play, you know, they can pop right into and pop right out of it. That's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be, I'm just playing this character. You know, I think we played Batman and Joker a little bit when we were kids or something. Or a lot of times we would quote the lines. As a kid, I'm just playing. And then it's like, oh, time for lunch. You know, yeah. And that's how it should be. That's how acting should be. It should be play. And when it stops becoming that, then it starts to become something quite dark, actually. Yeah, and I think that's from a novice director, as far as novice, at least as far as directing actors. Again, I'm sure he knows how to do a lot of other stuff. By the way, don't put too much credence on directors' skills when they have an entire team behind them. Sam Mendes, I feel like, is a very good director. He has an interesting vision, but he was lauded as a great director when he did, American Beauty. And we have to remember, he had just come out of directing in the theater, and honestly, I don't know why they gave him the film as a novice director, but he did a good job with it. But he himself has even admitted that it's only because he had a very good team. The cinematographer, I think it was Roger Deakins, if I'm correct on that, that team really made the film, and he just kind of guided it. So don't put too much credence. You know, Christopher Nolan is a good director, or does he have a really great team? It's hard to say sometimes. So, you know, you don't put too much credence on everything on him. And again, I'm not trying to put him down. You know, obviously he has a certain style, but don't be fooled. You know, sometimes some directors are really just they're nothing without their team. Notice Spielberg works with a lot of the same people, the editors, cinematographers, and casting directors and all that stuff. So that goes a long way. Same with like people like Wes Anderson. They work with the same people. So keep that in mind. And so, you know, now, again, I also can look back in a lot of the films. I wanted to talk about, too, about the fact that you start to see some slight signaling in his films of maybe his allegiances. It's, again, you can think I'm reaching, but I just want to point out something. And in films, a lot of Hollywood films, they will show where their allegiance lies through symbols. You know, there's a lot of films that will put out symbols of the, you know, of the square and compass crowd, if you know what I mean. And I do think Christopher Nolan might have some allegiance to that. Again, I might be reaching. You can look at the images and come to conclusions yourself. One thing I want to point out, though, is something that I feel like a little disturbing signaling in Tenet. So I'd say it's a little cryptic in a lot of Nolan's films, but something I'd say was not so cryptic in Tenet. So in Tenet, if you don't know, the Sator Square is very prevalent in the film. The Sator Square, for those who don't know, is basically this kind of cryptic symbol using words that people apparently used back in like first century Christians, maybe second century. I can't remember if it went a little further. I'd have to double check again. But it was basically, I guess, if you wanted to let people know you were a Christian, but not be obvious to, I guess, people who were persecuting Christians. And it was this square of words, basically, that you could look at. It had the word Satyr, it had the word opera, it had the word Orepo, which is basically opera backwards, it had Rotus, which is also Satyr backwards. But all these words are in Tenet. Rotas is the company that had the turnstile. Satyr's the villain. Orepo was this guy who owned the painting. Opera House was in the beginning of the film. So it's very clear he wanted to put in this symbol, this cryptic kind of sign of Christianity, right? So I first thought that actually when I learned that, then maybe maybe Christopher Nolan is letting people know that he's Christian. But then I had to realize that the film itself, a major theme in the film, if you recall, is inversion. So what's he saying with that? If the film is about kind of inversion, or it's a theme in the film, and then he puts a sign that is supposed to say that you're Christian, but then it's inverted, then what's he saying? I don't know. I'm a little concerned about that. And then there's another thing in that. I mean, so remember the film. Consider the scene with the antagonist when he first comes out of the rotary thing. When the first time the protagonist sees this guy all in black coming out and is moving in backward style, and he has to fight it. That scene is basically the protagonist fighting the antagonist. And then we find out later that actually, spoiler alert, that antagonist was actually the protagonist, and then we're reverted, and now the protagonist in the past has become kind of an antagonist. And so, well, you think, well, what are you saying there? Oh, and I think it's kind of clear what he's saying there. You're basically saying in one flow of time the antagonist is an antagonist, but in the other flow of time the antagonist is the protagonist. So in a sense he's saying from one angle something can be seen as evil, but from the other angle the other thing can be seen as evil. So there's this sense of relativity here, obviously. It's a sense of like it all depends on what's your perspective, which he kind of had a little bit of the idea of like what's your perspective in Dunkirk, and I felt like that was a better way of having that, because in Dunkirk it was kind of the idea is as a grunt soldier you don't see what, like, say the people in the sky have to deal with, and you don't understand your role in all of this. It depends on your perspective. I feel like that was more poignant, whereas in Tenet it was more about relativity. It's about like saying it was saying that something we call evil is not evil on a different angle, which is like, well, that's not true. That's taking absolute truth and trying to say there is no absolute truth. And that's disturbing, because that's an evil idea. And then when you start noticing that, I mean, so then I look into like a film like Interstellar. I mean, its message is basically this transhumanist kind of message. You know, he kind of chickened out there, and instead of making it that maybe something like a creator or intelligent design put the black hole there to help them, it was basically some evolved version of humanity, which is like, you know, that's. I felt like when he was talking about love transcends space and time, I feel like he was almost leaning towards maybe wanting to acknowledge a loving, intelligent design, but I honestly felt like he kind of chickened out there. Then you look at a film like Prestige, where the adaptation, it's from a book, and I don't believe this is in the book, from what I looked at. I could be wrong, but there's this part in the end where the main villain, he turned out to be a villain, Hugh Jackman's character, as he's dying, he basically was saying, you know, don't you know what it was all really about as a magician? Because Prestige is about magicians. It was to try and make people feel like there was more to this world than concrete. And he says something like, but it is concrete all the way through. There is nothing amazing in this world. And I just feel like, well, okay, then that's a dark thing to tell people, because it's not true. God is real. And this world is more than concrete. And but of course magicians are a part of the occult, and they want people to believe that there is nothing else outside of what we can give people. And so yeah, so you look back and there are some signs of dark stuff. I mean, even The Dark Knight, I remember when they said, you know, when Rachel tells Bruce through her letter, you know, believe in people, and I'm thinking, well, no, you can't have faith in people. Sorry, people are fallen, people are flesh. Of course we can love people, we can try and help people, but you can't have faith in people. So no. So yeah, you can see little bits of this throughout Christopher Nolan's career. And to go a little bit further though on some of the visuals of hints to me that I feel like, I don't know, he could be signaling to his, you know, square and compass crowd, there are some things I can't ignore. And again, I don't say this lightly. I kind of wanted to deny it when I first heard it, but as I learned a little bit more about the square and compass crowd, I heard certain things like, okay, the phrase memento mori. Memento mori is a phrase that is used among, particularly they like to invoke the square and compass crowd, which is basically saying, remember you'll die. And that was the actual name of the original short story that Jonathan Nolan wrote, that basically is the inspiration for the film Memento. So okay, you know, and you know, I was trying to think, okay, maybe that's a coincidence. You know, again, hopefully people remember the definition of what coincidence means. Coincidence actually doesn't mean what we tend to associate it. We tend to associate coincidence as serendipity, happenstance, no plans, whereas actually coincidence just means two things happening at the same time. So in a sense, it is a coincidence. But yeah, whatever. And so... And here's the thing is too, again, maybe some people who think it's okay to be part of the square and compass crowd, it is a bad thing, because I'm sorry, they try to argue it's not, but use your eyes and your ears. The square and compass crowd essentially worships other gods, and anything that is anything not worshiping God is evil. Okay, it's basically Satan through another name, so yeah, it is a bad thing. It's bad that if Christopher Nolan is part of that, it's revealing that he belongs to a dark agenda. So There's that. You can see it further in Interstellar. I mean, Saturn is something that tends to be worshipped in the square and compass crowd, because Saturn is actually ends up being a symbol, ends up being associated to Moloch, which hopefully people are aware of what that's been associated to recently, sacrificing little ones, and eventually, because Moloch is this horned kind of beast thing, it ends up being associated to Lucifer. So, and sometimes people even associate Saturn to Satan. So that's a problem right there, okay, and Interstellar is showing that, okay. And then there's the whole black cube thing, by the way, that's referring to this, is that Saturn worship. I didn't realize it had to do with because there's a storm at the top of Saturn that ends up kind of creating something that looks a little bit like a black cube. So they've been making symbolism of black cubes. And I couldn't help but notice that in The Dark Knight Rises, the platforms that Batman has in his cave are these black cubes that rise. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's a coincidence. I don't know. Again, you might have to make your own decision on that. I might be reaching. It's just, you combine Memento Mori, you combine Interstellar, you got Dark Knight Rises with the black cube. You got even Prestige with the box of the machine is shaped like a truncated obelisk. Obelisks are these kind of ancient Egyptian things of worship, and that is something that is used in a lot of square and compass crowd and triangle eye crowd. So again, make up your own mind on that score, I suppose. But it's concerning. So circling back, if it feels like Christopher Nolan is selling out or manifesting in his most recent film, it's probably because he is, okay? Because honestly, I think he's projecting himself into his films now, which is a problem, and it's totally it's a contradiction to his what he kind of wrote in his film Inception.
Only use details, a street lamp or a phone booth, never entire areas.
Why not?
Because building a dream from your memory is the easiest way to lose your grasp on what's real and what is a dream.
But you can kind of see this in his films. I mean, with Oppenheimer, him writing in first person, or Interstellar. I mean, he had mentioned that he'd been wanting to spend more time with his kids. You see it in Interstellar, him kind of, he has a daughter character. His oldest child is a daughter, by the way, Christopher Nolan. But in Interstellar, there's the daughter, and it was this idea that he had to go out, save the world, but he'll come back to his daughter. You can kind of see he's a little bit like, okay, he's kind of putting himself in there. And then the Odyssey now, it's like after a long journey, he thinks he can return, having defied the gods. I'm starting to get a sense, is that what you're saying, that you've been out in the world so long and you're going to return to your family, even though they're grown now? I feel like he's putting himself in the films, which is breaking the rules that he made in Inception. Again, whether he knew that he was creating a kind of allegory to filmmaking or not, I don't know. It's quite obvious to me, but he said he didn't know. Yeah, you're breaking your own rules there. But he made good films once, even if they did salute his allegiance to whatever. But like all filmmakers and films and filmmakers in Hollywood now, Satan comes to collect, and that's the thing. We can see now their skills have dried up. Satan, because Satan cannot truly create. He gives fame, fortune, money, prestige. These are all things that the devil can give, that Satan can give, but he can't create. That's of God. I think God gives people, God-given talent, and then when you give it over to Satan, he'll take it and use it to corrupt and to blaspheme God's name. But eventually, it runs dry. Your skills will run dry because Satan, of course, is not like Jesus. Jesus, can make all things new. Jesus can take your skills and turn it into something you never knew it could be. Satan does not give you more. Satan sucks you dry. Because he's the evil one. The evil one is death. And honestly, folks, these people, Hollywood is, like we've said before, is an occult practice place. It's a giant Babylon. It really is. And they worship Satan. They really do. And this is how they'll often get to be famous. So I'm sorry to say, but it's just the truth. And so is it any coincidence that we're seeing Hollywood, everyone is running dry? Even Hayao Miyazaki, that was my brother's, one of his favorite filmmakers, and his most recent film wasn't good either. It's like everyone's running dry because I think Satan's come to collect, and I think if God, maybe, because God is willing to stoop down into our filth and do some good things. So yeah, that's why I'm sure a lot of you love films. There's a lot of good films out there. A lot of them have some problems and some virtue, some signaling to their elite, their clubs, and a lot of them have Gnostic, subversive messages. But a lot of them did have some good stuff in there too, and I think that was God stooping down and putting some good messages for those. While we're in this muck and mire, we can still learn something maybe. And so all these filmmakers are now manifesting. But yeah, and again, and Satan can't create. He's just everyone's starting to dry up. And this is the exact opposite of what Jesus does. Jesus renews. Jesus makes all things new. It's his water doesn't run dry. It's kind of like that verse when Jesus is talking to the woman at the well. Everyone who drinks of this water, the well will be thirsty again. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. And this is just the character of God. This is of everything he gives us. It just continues to well up into more. Yeah, Satan is the opposite. Satan, everything about him dries up. Everything about him leads to death. Whereas Jesus wells up in you as a fountain of water, and it can make you renewed. I mean, Jesus will show you how to use your skills for good. If you surrender it to him, he will show you how to use your skills for good. But if not, if you go to Satan, your skills will dry up, your words will dry up, and then you'll find yourself beholden to the world or universal. But just like Peter Jackson, who seems to be sentenced now to help make bad Lord of the Rings films, or George Lucas stuck having only been able to make Star Wars for the most part, and Tom Hooper having been now allotted to make Cats, because these Hollywood people, they're all serving a satanic agenda, and they even are against each other. Like I said, they're trying to kill the director, and like they killed the writer, so that the masses can just accept this generic prepackaged slop that they've been feeding us for the last decade and a half. And so, yeah, honestly, I think the Odyssey is Nolan's Cats, unfortunately. I think this might be the end of him, somewhat. Again, he might be able to linger around a little bit, but I think this was an intent to kill his career, and he fell into it. He fell into it like a trap. But and that's not to that's not to take anything off of Nolan. He himself, I think, is also manifesting. Like I said, he's projecting himself into his films. He's forgotten the audience. He's breaking his rules, and he's revealing that he's just as much a sellout as his peers, unfortunately. I know it's harsh words, but I really do think that he's manifested into become the villain. It's like again, he's fallen into his own words. He's fallen into the statement, his own statement that he put in Dark Knight.
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
So yeah, it's times like this when heroes fail us that we feel kind of lost and we feel like aimless, and it really just shows that we never should have looked at these people as kind of heroes in the first place. This is why you need to put your gaze on Jesus. Jesus is the only solid rock. He's the only person that is completely faithful and steadfast, and we have to remember that. I know, and it's hard. Again, like I said, I fell into being a fan of Christopher Nolan. Again, I try not to. When you watch this stuff, but Hollywood, all these films are. This is part of the deception. This is part of what kind of can deceive you, is that you love the films. They use these things that are tasty morsels, like Turkish delight in the Narnia stuff. This stuff leads you in, and then you realize you fell for a facade. For all we know, Christopher Nolan isn't even that good of a filmmaker. He's just been packaged this way. I'm just hypothesizing, but the point is that you're falling. Every time you fall for anything but Jesus, it's a facade. I mean, you shouldn't even revere people who are regular old people. We need to love people, pray for your enemies, and take care of people. But don't look to them as a leader or a hero. Only Jesus is the only person you should look to as a hero, as a savior, is someone who is steadfast and faithful and unchanging. And that's only God, and that's Jesus. Jesus is God. Honestly, then that's the only way not to be fooled. That's the only way not to be deceived. I'm asking, hopefully if you're listening to this, you need to try Jesus out. He's the only one who won't fail you. He is literally referred to as the cornerstone, the solid rock. He says he will never leave you nor forsake you. He's better even an earthly father. If you have a good earthly father, or if you don't, either way, even if you have a good earthly father, you need to look to Jesus, because even good people will fail you. Even good people will make mistakes. We're all human, but Jesus will never fail you. Jesus will never make a mistake. He died for your sins, and he's given you eternal life by his shed blood. He is God. God made into flesh. He came to earth and died for our sins, shed his blood for our sins, so that we can be with him and with the Father. And with him, by the way, is just being in pure love and pure faithfulness. It's the best feeling, for lack of a better word, that you could ever feel. It's joy beyond comprehension. And while we're on earth, we go through our walk in life, and we will have the Holy Spirit with us. When you have the Holy Spirit with you when you are saved, when you receive Jesus' salvation, which is as easy as just accepting it and believing it. And you're given the Holy Spirit, which helps you in every way of your life. It helps discern your mind, make you not fall for people, for directors and for musicians and for all these heroes, but only look to him. And that's something we have to, and part of our walk, we have to remember to only look to him as our Savior, as our hero, as our leader, as our guide, as our counselor, our teacher, our Father, and our true friend. Everyone else, even good people, are not going to be as good as Jesus. We should not put those people above Jesus, and we shouldn't put them in similar positions that we should put Jesus as a counselor. And I'm not saying disregard people, of course. You can always take advice from people, but again, the Holy Spirit is, if you put Jesus as paramount, the Holy Spirit will help you discern what is right and what is wrong and what is wise. And it's the only way. It's the only way. You can be as learned as you want. You can have modern wisdom, but you need Jesus. Only Jesus will help you discern what is right. I hope you do receive Jesus. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next time. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.